Two film genres I've been in love with since I first laid eyes on a movie screen are science fiction and horror. So when you can mix those two elements together, I'm always interested. Specifically on the science fiction side, the subgenre of time travel has always been close to my heart. So even though the success rate of this type of genre mixing isn't all that great, you're always going to get something interesting as a result of the attempt. So, in no particular order, here is a quick look at 5 time travel horror thrillers that achieve something special in this subgenre category.
Listen up, folks. Your classmate, Taylor Fisher, was murdered in her bedroom this morning. What?
The film I caught again recently that inspired me to do this brief dive is 2011's Detention. This film came out of nowhere for me, completely bypassing me upon its release in 2011. Directed by prolific music video director Joseph Kahn, Detention is almost indescribable. But if I had to try, I'd say Back to the Future reimagined as a slasher film, made with the sensibilities of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, or perhaps cult classic 90s television series Parker Lewis Can't Lose. The film itself follows a day in the life of Clapton Davis, played by Josh Hutcherson, a high school student caught in the middle of a typical teen love triangle of sorts, but forget that part. Detention establishes itself as a slasher film before the opening credits and does not hold back on the horror and dark comedy elements. However, what makes this film unique is that writers Joseph Kahn and Mark Palermo's script just doesn't give a f*** and throws everything that they think is going to be funny, interesting, or thought-provoking into the mix. The film establishes as a throwaway joke early on that there is a project being worked on in one of the science classes where the assignment is to build a time machine so the teacher, as he expresses directly to the class, can get the hell out of there. But this time machine subplot continually gets dismissed until about halfway through, at which point it pays off big, as the characters start bouncing back and forth between 1992 and 2011 to solve the slasher mystery while half-heartedly trying not to destroy the timeline. And I should mention that the time machine itself is built into a giant stuffed bear. Now, the second and third acts are a tour de force of bizarre humor and every bizarre angle you can think of at tackling both the slasher and the time travel plots. I love it when a filmmaker has the attitude and balls just to take the concept right to its limits, then blast right past those limits. But I really love it when it works, and Detention works for the most part. Check your critical thinking skills at the door when you watch this, and you have a really good chance to be thoroughly entertained, or at the very least have fun scratching your head through 90 minutes of fun what the f*** moments. The short runtime means the premise doesn't outstay its welcome. Well, by no means a perfect film, it's definitely college party crowd-pleasing material that can be appreciated by anyone with an offbeat sense of humor. Even by someone like me that's rapidly clocking up double-digit years since my college party days.
Yo, she-bitch. Let's go.
No list of time travel horror films can be complete without the cult classic Army of Darkness from 1992. Before director Sam Raimi was delighting us with the MCU's Doctor Strange or the early 2000s Spider-Man films, well, at least delighting us with 2 of the 3 early 2000s Spider-Man films, Raimi had built his film career on the back of the Evil Dead series with its brutality, humor, and insane camera work. The most campy of the bunch is Army of Darkness, the final film in the original Evil Dead trilogy. While the time travel element is introduced at the end of Evil Dead 2 as just a one-off curveball gag at the end, Army of Darkness doubles down on it. After a horrifying night of being assaulted by demons throughout the first 2 films, department store clerk Ash Williams, the character painstakingly crafted by B-movie cult film god Bruce Campbell, uses the mysterious incantations from the Book of the Necronomicon to send the evil back to hell, but inadvertently sends himself, his chainsaw, his '78 Oldsmobile Delta 88, and the evil back in time 600 years, where Ash ends up having to lead a medieval army up against legions of the undead, who can only be defeated by complete dismemberment of their physical forms. Of all the Evil Dead films, this is the only one that goes balls to the wall full comedy camp. From the standpoint of being one of the Evil Dead series, it's almost universally agreed that this is the weakest of the bunch, though it's possibly the most entertaining. Campbell's take on Ash Williams in this film is what finally cemented this egotistical, misogynist, dumb but resourceful hero into a pop culture and B-movie icon, as Raimi's script doubles down on the technological and cultural anachronisms amidst plenty of the classic Evil Dead bloodbaths that the series is best known for. Rather as a joke more than anything else, Raimi has ensured that this entire trilogy of films forcibly breaks continuity with the previous installments, either to ensure that these films can all be viewed standalone, or in reality, probably just because he thought it would be funny. If you do decide to check out Army of Darkness, I would recommend seeking out the director's cut rather than the US theatrical cut. The director's cut has several minutes restored, and an ending that is much funnier, cynical, and apropos to the Evil Dead series. However, if you choose to move on to the surprisingly awesome Ash vs. Evil Dead Stars television series from a few years back, it does actually continue on seamlessly, albeit a couple of decades later, from the US theatrical cut ending. Though that is not a big deal since one of the series' trademarks is breaking its own continuity.
You go back, Herbert. The future isn't what you thought. It's what I am.
Going from campy to classy, the first time travel film that ever captivated me as a child was the 1979 classic Time After Time, starring future acting legends Malcolm McDowell and David Warner, supplemented by a great supporting turn by a young Mary Steenburgen, who would do a little more time traveling about a decade later in the Back to the Future series. Time After Time is the shining directorial debut of Nicholas Meyer, who Star Trek fans will know as the mastermind behind some of the best work in that film series, helming both Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Time After Time melted my 9-year-old brain as I watched it dozens of times on HBO through the early 80s, and it was my first intense exposure to both thrillers and time travel cinema. It's a retelling of the classic H.G. Wells novel The Time Machine, this time going meta before meta was a thing. Malcolm McDowell actually plays H.G. Wells, suggesting that Wells' book The Time Machine was based in fact, and that he in fact was the titular time traveler from the novel. On a night where Wells chooses to call his elite set of friends over to announce the invention of his time machine, a la the novel, unbeknownst to Wells, one of his guests and oldest friends turns out to be the infamous Jack the Ripper, played by David Warner, who has been terrorizing London on the most infamous serial killing spree in history. With the London police closing in on him, he escapes to the year 1979 in Wells' time machine, where he unleashes his brand of terror on then modern-day San Francisco, committing a series of grisly murders. Using the machine without the master key forces it to return to its starting point, so McDowell's Wells is able to follow him into 1979, where he must somehow convince the authorities that they've got a serial killer from the late 1800s London on their hands without sounding like a complete lunatic. While the horror elements of this film are fairly mild, there are a couple of brief but fairly graphic scenes. Malcolm McDowell's performance as Wells is simply charming, brilliant, and relatable, while the cynical tone and nihilistic attitude of Warner's Jack the Ripper is just a tour de force of an evil performance. Both McDowell and Warner have a captivating scenery-chewing competition between them, and Time After Time shines its brightest when they share the screen together. It's a wonderful blend of violence and fish-out-of-water humor as both the protagonist and the antagonist navigate 1979 society with entirely different attitudes. While the premise sounds campy, don't be fooled. This is played completely stone-cold straight, and it is just a gem that no one should miss if they are into time travel cinema. Even if horror is not your bag, Time After Time, while technically being a killer-on-the-loose horror thriller, simply uses horror elements as a plot device, but leans heavily on the time travel aspect, whilst incorporating a great love story that plays on themes of the women's liberation movement of the 70s and 80s. Often overlooked, Time After Time definitely played a huge part of my film tastes growing up, and it still holds up brilliantly in the 21st century. The love story plays so well that this might be the closest thing to a horror film that I can still heartily recommend as a date movie. Plus, you get a scene where a man from 1890s London tries to navigate his first trip into a McDonald's, and it's awesome. That scene never gets old.
Well, I was dying. Again.
Moving on to more recent mainstream horror, you're probably aware of director Christopher Landon's 2017 film Happy Death Day, under the umbrella of the horror factory powerhouse Blumhouse Productions. These days, I absolutely never go into a mainstream horror film with expectations of it being worth a damned, as the Hollywood cash cow factory of cheap but profitable horror doesn't have a great track record. But Blumhouse does have a record of popping out incredible gems in the horror genre from time to time, and Happy Death Day is one of the most refreshing surprises in the genre over the last decade or so. This cheeky horror remake of the classic Bill Murray film Groundhog Day sees an egotistical, unlikable sorority girl, Tree Gelbman, played by Jessica Roth, get stalked and killed in Act 1, only to wake up again that same morning to have to relive the day over and over again, trying to unravel the mystery of who the killer is, while at the same time navigate the day to a conclusion where she doesn't get killed. This is a brutally funny film that does not hold back on the horror elements. Well written and performed, Happy Death Day sustains its momentum from the first frame through the conclusion. Most importantly, it's just damned entertaining, and the whodunit nature keeps you guessing. Now, the fact that it's derivative of Groundhog Day is not only acknowledged directly in the film itself, it revels in the absurdity of the premise, even playing with the audience out of the gate with the classic modern Universal Pictures bumper before the opening credits, skipping back in time and replaying again 2 or 3 times before launching into the movie itself. It gives me hope when a gem like this comes out of mainstream horror. The movie revels in the similarities to the source material it's derivative of, but it breathes fresh air into this premise with a great new take on this classic tale of redemption. I went into Happy Death Day expecting to be thoroughly unimpressed and came out with a goofy grin, simply admiring the slick plotting, pacing, and character work. Saving what I think is one of the best handling of time travel in cinema is the 2007 Spanish film TimeCrimes, directed by Nacho Vigalono. This is a very simple, low-budget thriller with time travel elements in the vein of the cult indie film Primer. If you've not heard of Primer, that one deserves its own full video later on down the road. TimeCrimes starts rather routinely as we're introduced briefly to a pleasant but plain middle-aged couple who are enjoying a Saturday afternoon in their new home in the hills. The husband, Hector, starts to notice some odd activity in the woods above his house that includes strange people moving around, a woman undressing, and just enough additional weirdness that he decides to investigate after his wife leaves for an evening on the town. From there, Hector eventually gets into trouble in the woods, getting stabbed in the arm with a pair of scissors by a mysterious man in bandages after coming across a nude, unconscious woman inexplicably laid out but seemingly unharmed against a rock. From there, Hector eventually stumbles into a small building or facility while trying to hide from the man who stabbed him, and this facility is involved in some rudimentary time travel experimentation, where Hector ends up going about an hour and a half back in time to witness himself playing out the opening scenes of the movie. Now, while you think you have the film's surprise figured out in the first few minutes, you do, but you don't. Yes, the mysterious man chasing Hector is obviously going to end up being a future version of himself, or is it? The problems don't ensue from our main character not understanding what's going on, but what he decides to do once he does understand what's going on. Hector then makes a series of stubborn decisions that slowly, over the course of the film, destroy his life in ways he couldn't imagine, and has the audience questioning the very nature of cause and effect itself. It's a smart, tense, excellently paced thriller that dumps you directly into the mystery and action within the first few minutes and never lets up until the satisfying but utterly emotionally frustrating conclusion. In my opinion, another one that ranks in the upper echelon of films that handle time travel so thoughtfully that it forces you to ponder what would the real implications of time travel be. Another overlooked classic. There are a few other films that deserve to be talked about on a list like this that I will absolutely be covering in depth in later videos. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more in-depth analysis on individual films that are overlooked, obscure, strange, or even mainstream films that I believe have a notable place in the history of cinema.